Welcome to Workforces. I'm Julian Alssid.
And I'm Kaitlin LeMoine, and we speak with the innovators who shape the future of work and learning.
Together, we unpack the complex elements of workforce and career preparation and offer practical solutions that can be scaled and sustained.
Workforces is supported by Lumina Foundation. Lumina is an independent private foundation in Indianapolis that is committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. Let's dive in. Welcome back. We're excited to be kicking off Season 4 of Workforces.
As we kick off this new season, we're looking forward to diving into topics that resonate with you, our listeners, and connect with our consulting work as well.
One topic that's top of mind for us is how to most effectively prepare learners for the jobs and careers they enter upon graduation. We're seeing more of an emphasis on models that bridge education and work, from work-based learning to apprenticeships and internships.
And with increasing skill demand, we know that students need more experience when they graduate, whether from high school or post-secondary programs. And in our work, we're involved with initiatives that are tackling this issue from different levels, from community colleges to statewide consortia.
We're looking forward to our discussion with today's guest to explore how corporations can act as a driver of high-quality, industry-aligned education. Brandon Busteed is the CEO of BrandEd, a family-owned education company that partners with global brands like Sotheby's and the New York Times to offer experiential learning courses. He's a passionate advocate for work-integrated learning and believes the future of education will seamlessly blend learning and work environments. With a background as an edtech entrepreneur and executive at Kaplan and Gallup, Brandon brings a wealth of experience to his current role. He's a recognized thought leader in education and workforce development, having founded a successful edtech company and authored numerous articles and publications. Brandon is also a sought-after speaker and serves on the boards of several organizations dedicated to improving education and workforce outcomes. We're thrilled to have him join us today for a deep dive into the exciting intersection of learning and work. So welcome to the Workforces podcast, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks. That, to me, the most exciting intersection to be in the middle of. And I know you guys in your podcast have sat at that intersection as well. So I'm glad that we have an opportunity to meet up virtually here. Thanks for having me.
Well, yeah, it is great to have you, Brandon. And yes, we often use the that analogy of the intersection and what a messy intersection it is. But for people like you who help us all trying to make sense of this crazy intersection. So yes, welcome. Kaitlin, gave a little bit of your background, but we'd love to hear in your own words about your background and your current role at BrandEd.
Yeah. So, as you guys noted, I started down this education path literally right out of college as an undergrad. If you had asked me my senior year in college whether I was going to be in the education space, I would have probably told you no, really wasn't on the radar. And then I started a company. I started an education company that was focused on addressing a really important issue of college binge drinking, which at the time was, at the top of the list of concerns among college leaders. And so that was, kind of my first run as a founder and CEO of Outside the Classroom in a very specific space, trying to address dangerous drinking and other drinking related behaviors on campus. And, when the organization was acquired, I had an opportunity to go help Gallup build an education and workforce development division. And that really, in terms of, where I am at BrandEd, is a bit of my origin story to why BrandEd, because you guys may recall that during that time, Gallup issued this massive study on the outcome of college graduates. It was, under the heading of the Gallup Purdue Index. And to this day, still the largest representative study that's ever been done looking at college graduates and their outcomes in work and in well-being and other dimensions. And what was so important about that study was that work-integrated learning opportunities, if a student had one during college, doubled their odds of being successful later in life, not just from a workplace engagement perspective, but in their overall well-being. And so if you think about, the secret ingredients of education or the secret ingredients of college, one of the big aspects is work-integrated learning. And, Kaitlin, as you were doing the introduction, there's a lot of different derivatives of what we would call work-integrated learning. But specifically, it was things like whether a student had an internship where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom. That connectivity was really important. Long-term projects that took a semester or more to complete, again, mimicking more of a real-world work environment. And so I pause on that part of my Gallup experience because as I left and went to Kaplan and was able to work in a global role at Kaplan specific to education, I was spending a lot of time looking at the learning and work intersection. That included work that we did with Amazon and their career choice program for upskilling their frontline workers, and even innovative options for high school students in enabling them to have a better understanding of jobs and careers so that they could better understand what they should major in during college, right? So all that led to why Brand Ed. I've been at Brand Ed for just under a year now. And in simple terms, I looked at what they were doing. And to me, and I won't take any credit for it because I said this prior to my arrival, but there's no doubt that Brand Ed is doing the world's best industry immersive education. And what do I mean by that, right? We work with iconic brands, as you mentioned, organizations like the New York Times or Sotheby's or Manchester City, and we develop just incredibly engaging and exciting educational programs that are co-taught by industry experts and educational experts that give students real hands-on experiences and applications. It gives them behind the scenes access to these organizations in the industry and access not just to one, but many experts from those industries to understand the incredible diversity of jobs that one could have in the art industry or the fashion industry or the sport business industry. And so I was excited to be part of that, and have been thrilled to be coming up on almost a year here so far.
So can you tell us a little bit about the history of Brand Ed? How did it start, and kind of what was the impetus for the organization?
Yeah, I've had a few friends joke thinking that I must have started my own company because I called it Brand Ed. It's just a coincidence that it happens to be very closely aligned my name because Brand Ed has been around for a good 20 plus years, Kaitlin, and it started with, interestingly enough, the acquisition of Sotheby's Institute of Art out of Sotheby's, the auction house. So Sotheby's had started Sotheby's Institute of Art some 55 years ago as an educational institution that would train the future leaders of the art industry. And although from the beginning, they certainly had the idea that it would help train future leaders at Sotheby's, they were very innovative in their thinking in that they also knew it would be the kind of place that would contribute to talent and leaders in the industry writ large. And, that's a consistent theme that I've seen in all of the brand partners we work with. The New York Times, we run the School of New York Times. It's a pre-college program for high school students. But they very much see their role as contributing to, students going into the field of journalism, having a better understanding of what the different roles are within that industry. And not just for the New York Times, but for the entire industry, if you will, media and journalism. Same thing can be said for the work we do with Manchester City and with Vogue. And so anyway, the starting point was that acquisition, interestingly enough, of an educational institution being run inside of a company, realizing that education wasn't their wheelhouse, it wasn't their core focus, but that it had an important role in the world, and looking to an organization like Brand Ed to run it in a highly professional academic way where there was a lot of alignment to educational outcomes. Similarly, the organization acquired what was then called Condé Nast College of Fashion out of Condé Nast. It was recently rebranded Vogue College of Fashion. So that's what it is now. And then we partnered with, I would say, an organic partnership with both the New York Times and Manchester City in developing the programs there. So it's a really interesting example of a couple that were educational institutions started inside of companies that were very forward thinking and how they viewed talent development not just for their organization, but for the industry in general. And then others who just saw the value of, partnering to do this. Because I would say, if you ask me what some of the secret sauce of our Brand Ed programs is, it's a really simple example, but it's a powerful one, and it's co-teaching. We always have examples where a school invites somebody in to give a guest lecture. That's great. It's usually a one-time thing. There's not a lot of prep. That person might be really great and engaging or not so much. All the programs we do, they're co-designed, curated, developed, and taught by the industry experts and educational experts, which you would think of as teachers or faculty. I don't think that's unique to Brand Ed. I think we do it in a world-class way, but that's an example, I think, of where other educational organizations can make big strides in scaling this industry immersive opportunity. It's not rocket science, but that co-teaching is actually just a really rare example right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Brandon, hearing you kind of talk about the history of the companies being so kind of at the forefront in this notion of this immersive approach. But I also think back to the study you referenced when you were Gallup, that big study, and it does seem like, and I don't know if this is chicken or an egg or whatever, but that study was big, and it highlighted this issue about the work-based learning component being so impactful. It seems that this has become way more of a storyline in workforce development than it was back then. And I'm curious, from where you're sitting now and since you did that study, like why? What's going on, in your opinion, that's made this more front and center than ever before?
Yeah, look, I think the biggest driver is just when the price tag of education goes up, and especially higher education, and when the number one reason why people value higher education is to get a good or better job, there starts to become a more rigorous return on investment calculation being done by prospective students and their families as they evaluate it, right? And if you say, hey, the number one reason why I value this degree or I'm going to pursue it is to get a good or better job, and you don't feel like that's happening or that you're being, really sufficiently prepared for that next step, well, that I think is one of the big drivers, right? Cost has been going up. Doubts about the work readiness of graduates has been going up as well. And so you've got a perfect storm of, I don't believe we're doing a good job of this work, preparation or career readiness thing. And it's getting more and more expensive. And oh, by the way, there's a lot of other interesting alternatives, right? And so It's been the backdrop of that. But yeah, look, I think that study made a meaningful contribution to the thinking of the higher ed community around, wow, this is a valuable component. We do it, but we don't do it at scale. Like that was the big finding, Julian, from that study. About a third of college graduates had a job or internship where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom. So it's not zero, but 2/3 were missing the mark. And, there's fresh data just this year from the Business Higher Ed Forum that kind of speaks to this. There were 8.2 million college students who wanted an internship last year. Only 3.6 million got one. And of those, only 2.5 million had what they called a quality experience in that internship, right? Because we all know there's internships that are really great and some that are total duds. Well, what I take from that data, first, I'm a huge fan of internships. There aren't many people that are a bigger fan of internships than me, but you also realize they don't scale. So there's no data to suggest that the number of internships in the United States has increased over the last 30 or 40 years. Clearly, demand for it is sky high. And so you say, okay, if you can get an internship, great. But short of that, what are the other ways that we can bring this valuable experience to more students at greater scale? And that's obviously why, I'm so excited about the work that we're doing at Brand Ed, is that I think we're going to make a meaningful contribution to that.
So as you're talking about your learners, Brandon, who are your learners and how do you reach them?
We work across the board, Kaitlin, with each of our brand partners. We have pre-college programs for high school students, primarily 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. So that's clearly a big demographic that we serve, is current high school students who are looking to augment their high school academics experience with, something that is really industry immersive. And we also serve undergraduate college students with opportunities to study away or study abroad, where instead of the traditional study abroad experience, they're doing an industry immersive program with one of our brands. And then with Vogue and Sotheby specifically, we do operate master's degree programs within both of those organizations. So at Sotheby's, we're known probably most prominently for our master's in art business. You would expect an organization like Sotheby's Institute of Art to probably have a degree like that. So, within those two brands, we're serving master's degree students. But in terms of the largest volume of students that we're serving by number, it's clearly pre-college students and undergraduates who are looking to add a valuable industry immersive experience to their otherwise academic portfolio.
So, Brandon, as you build out these immersive experiences with these global brands, what are the major successes and challenges you faced?
Yeah, look, I mean, part of it is what we've invested a lot of time and energy in and years as an organization in refining the aspects of how do you take the best of what you can learn in a work environment with the best of what academics do in terms of curating something that looks like an academic syllabus or schedule that has building sequential pieces to it, reflective components. Think about in the workplace, how little we take time to reflect or digest a project or be like, hey, how did that go? Cutting edge organizations do a good job with debriefing and certain things like that. But anyway, to your good question, a lot of it has been refining the blending of these two worlds, right? And you've all heard it. A lot of academics who are trained in educational pedagogy have rarely had experiences outside of academia. And they went to graduate school for education. They have a master's degree, but relatively little work experience outside of being a student and outside of working in an academic environment. And then with a lot of the subject matter experts we work with who have real jobs in real organizations, right? They haven't been trained in educational pedagogy. They haven't thought about, well, how do I make this engaging for a high school student? And so it's really been the efforts that we've invested in training both our educational experts or faculty and our industry experts, and then getting them to work together. Because like I said, it's not, hey, invite a guest lecturer in and they do their talk and leave. Like
Right.
these are things that are co-designed, curated together, developed together. And so that's our biggest challenge and opportunity. We've honed in on that craft. Doing that requires real effort. I can't launch a brand new program without having some pretty good lead up time in terms of the work involved in producing it, whether that's an in-person or an online program. And then the other thing where, we bring this to life for students, it has some natural limitation, is access to behind the scenes things, right? Students who come into a Sotheby's program are visiting the auction house. They're getting a behind the scenes look at the organization in ways that, you just can't replicate otherwise. So I think our biggest opportunities, like everything else, are indeed scale, but we've developed a model that has a lot more scale than an internship model or a co-op model. So, but fundamentally, there are still those limitations like I've provided.
So, Caitlin asked you, we tend to think of this as a dual customer kind of business, right? Your learners, your employers. Who are the faculty?
So it's any number of folks in various roles within both our partner organizations and folks within the broader like sport industry, for example. So if you take the School of the New York Times, probably about half of the faculty in the New York Times are indeed staff members or former staff members from the New York Times. The other half are a combination of folks that have had journalism backgrounds for other organizations, right, et cetera. So it's a mix of both staff from the organizations we've partnered with and then staff from the industry. But again, underneath that layer, Julian, it's an industry expert and what we would think of as a teaching or educational expert. So we have general education faculty who are partnering with these subject matter experts to help create the syllabus, right? Put some structure around it. Think about not just the assignments and projects that students would do, which largely come from the industry expert input, but thinking about, okay, how do we roll this out with a student group? How do we create a rubric for giving them feedback or grading these projects, right? And so it's those two types of backgrounds working together that definitely make every one of our programs come to life. But it's been interesting because as I watch and sit in some of our classes, I see joy in the students that are in the classes, right, where they're clearly getting exposed to things that they don't in school. One of those common refrains I get from students is like, wow, this felt nothing like school. This is totally different, right? I mean, it feels different to them. But I also see joy on the faces of the faculty that are teaching these programs. And again, faculty meaning two meanings, the educational, trained experts, and then the industry experts who are spending time away from their jobs to, come and provide these educational experiences for students. And for them, it's very much about getting excited about the future generation of folks who may be interested in this field, and really trying to kind of get behind them, embrace them in more of a mentorship, support type fashion, which is really awesome to see.
Yeah, I'm really stuck on what you just said a moment ago, Brandon, about how learners will say this doesn't feel like school. It's curious to me, right? Like what I wonder, I mean, this is a general wondering, but it's almost like I wonder what that means for how we offer secondary ed, right? Or
Right.
higher ed. I mean, if you're saying you're drawing from secondary school learners as well as learners already enrolled in undergraduate programs, what are the implications for even how those learners go back to those environments?
Here's the good news. There's awesome examples out there, right? They haven't been brought to scale. So you think about the high schools that have invested heavily in project-based learning. That's a big component of what we're doing, right? I mean, their students are engaged in real projects. They're given feedback on those projects. They have to then go back to the drawing board and iterate a bit, right? So that iterative feedback process in the midst of a real project or deliverable is a big part of what we do in our brand ed programs. But you can do that with just a little bit of imagination in any academic program out there. I've seen it done in Intro to Spanish to Philosophy, right? Where project-based learning and iterative feedback and small group work is part of it. Those things mimic much more of what a real world work environment is like. So short of having a job where you do that, or short of having an internship where you do that, I think we can do these kinds of things at greater scale. We've seen schools do this at greater scale. So it gives me a lot of hope that with a little bit of familiarity, a little bit of support, a little bit of teacher encouragement, we can indeed get to a place where a lot more of this happens, where the students do say like, oh my gosh, I got to do something real. I met a real life so-and-so, person in job that you envision you might want to be in someday. And then, like the other refrain we get a lot from students is they're like, I had no idea that there were so many different kinds of jobs in this industry, right? So you think fashion, you're like, oh, fashion design, right? Well, but the reality is there are, hundreds of different kinds of jobs that exist in the fashion industry, including you could be an accountant working for a fashion organization. So that might not mean that you are the fashion design guru, but you are in the fashion industry in a job like an accounting role. And so I think that's the other thing is we're helping to open the aperture of thinking to the art of possible, not just, the fashion industry, but all the different components of it. Think about a hospital, right? There's everything from, the nurse to the doctor. Those are the classic roles everybody thinks of very simplistically, right? Then you think about the lab techs and the radiology techs. And I mean, all of a sudden you can take a single hospital and realize there are dozens of different jobs beyond doctor and nurse, right? And so that's a lot of what we need to help younger people do. And I would argue maybe even older people figure out is there's a lot of college graduates leaving, their undergrad program or their master's program, still not really fully understanding the breadth of jobs that exist in the world.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think and Julie and I have been talking a lot about that point recently, just around the transparency of roles. And I feel like, it's not, we're no longer in the days of like, doctor, lawyer, teacher, right? Like there are so many jobs and so many jobs that cross sectors, and what those, there's some common skills that you draw upon throughout those different jobs, but there's some distinct knowledge and skill sets you need as well. And just being transparent about that, I feel like is such a critical piece of this puzzle. And I think what you mentioned about the project-based learning piece, right? I mean, like that is something that is certainly transferable. And, I've spent years designing those types of programs and curriculum myself. And there certainly is that transferability, but it does require different type of intentionality and just a slight shift in thinking, it's exciting to think about, more and more as we think future state, as you're saying, how can we integrate work-based learning more kind of across education? There are, I think, some really exciting ways to do that.
We lose track of this. Like I use the words fun and exciting and engaging when I think about or describe brand ed programs. So it's not just that it's industry immersive and it has this very purposeful connection to work readiness and career readiness. It's that like you're in these programs and you're having fun, you're excited. And like, I just feel like we have lost sight of the fun and excitement and engaging factor of school and education. Like if we can't figure out how to get back to that, where students are like, that was awesome. we've got it. We've got another thing coming.
Right. Well, it's funny too. Like we're doing work now around manufacturing and advanced manufacturing, and a big project in Massachusetts, for example, or done some work in life sciences. There's some really cool jobs out there that people know nothing about,
right?
Which is just amazing. So, of course, yes, I would like to work for Man City, but that's a different conversation. So bringing us back to your namesake, Brand Ed, how will Brand Ed continue to grow?
The programs we have with current partners, there's, in my mind, plenty of growth ahead just in building, those programs as they exist. Mm-hmm. We're also launching, new versions of what we're doing, right? So the last several years, we've done exclusively in-person summer pre-college programs for high school students. Just this week, we're going to be launching the first online pre-college offering. So for students that can't take, a 2-week block in the summer, can't afford an in-person, intensive summer program, we will have fully online offerings available. That also won't require students necessarily to have to do it just in the summer. So, expanding by modality and some of the differences and options. But certainly, we're going to keep our eyes open to what are other iconic brands in, I would argue, iconic industries that we know students are interested in, that we know would really excite and engage them in ways that, that you wouldn't otherwise. Like you say, like, what's the essence of a globally recognized brand? It's that, it's like students hear Sotheby's or they hear New York Times or Vogue. Like if you're interested in fashion, Vogue is the name, right? And so if I could attend or be part of a Vogue program, you're excited from the very beginning. And then on the end of it, you also have something very exciting to add to your resume that stands out uniquely and differently than other experiences, right? When you can put a globally recognized brand as part of your experience in your resume, that's a big deal. So, we've talked about the experience being a really engaging one, but it's the excitement based on the brand that, certainly attracts a lot of students to it. And then on the, once they've left the program, it's something that stands as a really unique attribute on their resume. So we will be thinking about, potentially other brands and industries, but it's going to be, I think a very careful decision-making process, because when and if we do it at such a high quality and with demanding standards and expectations from our partners that, like, you can't just go run and do 60 of these things. And, we've done 4 over 20 years. So you got to do it right is one of the pieces. So certainly there may be a day where, there's another brand or industry that's part of what we do. But certainly right now, we've got a lot of growth ahead in working with the 4 partners that we work with today.
So I think you just started to go in the direction of my next question, but in saying, you need to kind of be really intentional and start with the programs you have and really build them out effectively. But as we consider practical steps our listeners can take to become forces in developing models to prepare learners for the future of work, what are some of your transferable learnings from these programs at this point, whether it's common program elements, I know you mentioned co-teaching as one, but other program elements that are transferable or other ideas that you're considering as you go forward?
I think I've largely mentioned it, but it's probably helpful to summarize, right? Certainly co-teaching, right? And that's different and distinct from, we're just going to have an invited lecturer come in, right? Like think of how many invited lecturers we have come in from industry where there's no preparation, there's no context given to that lecturer about what's being taught in the class, how they might sync up with it. There's usually no opportunity for students to interact with that person beyond the 30 or 40 minutes that they were in the class, right? So, this is truly co-teaching. Have an industry expert and a teacher working together on developing a program, a syllabus, the idea for the projects, the rubric, right? I fundamentally believe any school can do that if they invest intentionally in that type of effort. The other one is making sure that there's some form of hands-on work and projects that students are engaged in where they're given feedback, an opportunity to make modifications and changes to their work, right? That happens frequently in work situations. It's not just like there's a pop quiz and that's a one-time event. Like we have relatively little of that in the workplace. It's usually I'm working on something. I've gathered some new data. It changes my thesis. I got some feedback from my manager before we present it to the C-suite, whatever it might be, right? So it's that hands-on experience where there's some feedback and ability to iterate. And so I think that's it. And then to take time to pause on saying, I know we're talking about the art industry today, but think of the diversity of jobs in the art industry, from museum curation for a nonprofit museum to working at a corporate auction house. I mean, and everything in between is opening that aperture, right? To pause and say, hey, I know this is a course on medicine. Let's talk about some of the different roles in a hospital that, make our medical world work, right? And you see the stuff up front of the house. You see very little of all the other components that make it work, including the business people who, the CFOs, the accountants behind the scenes, right? I mean, there's all that. So I'd say those are elements that are transferable to pretty much any educational entity. It's just a matter of whether they're going to be intentional in doing that in their design and in their programmatic follow through. And then, of course, the other thing it forces, Kaitlin, is a little bit of a difference in how we grade or assess this work, right? If it's project based, there's a different rubric. It's not as simple as, multiple choice assessments. It's not, so that I think becomes the next challenge, is that, if you really want accountability built around it, you've got to think about different ways to assess the quality of the work that students are doing.
Well, it sounds like, as you're speaking, Brendan, correct me if you see it differently, that, while you're working with these iconic, global superstar organizations, that many of the very elements in your approach could become part of regional, sectoral, or statewide, or global iconic, but working in regions around the country.
Absolutely. I mean, look, and we're all suffering from this issue of how do we do a better job working across sectors, right? Across the larger employment world, because it's not just for profits and companies, right? It's large nonprofits, it's state and federal government entities, right? Employers writ large, and educational institutions. And the reality is that, like, one of the reasons why Brand Ed exists is because schools aren't very good at doing work integrated learning, and employers aren't very good at doing learning integrated work. And so Voila, an organization like Brand Ed, can have an important place in the world. But to your points, both of you, I think a lot of the elements of what really make these programs come to life for students can be done in many different ways. And I would be thrilled to see that happen. I mean, I know what we're doing is special and unique. We're going to stay, within that type of framework. But the examples from some of the core of what we're doing is certainly applicable to others. It's certainly scalable. And I think, Kaitlin, you use the word intentionality. Like, that really is the story. If you're intentional, you'll figure out a way to make this happen. I say to every college leader I talk to, where there is a will, there is a way. That's our issue, is we've had little will on this relative to anything else. So
it's really wonderful learning about the model and your approach to this work. And, you continue to be quite a force. And so how can our listeners continue to follow you, learn more? Because we certainly intend to.
Yeah. Well, the work we're doing through Brand Ed is at our website. It's branded-edu.com. And then the only place that I really invest time and energy, really two sources. I write regularly at Forbes as a contributor for Forbes.com. Yep. Easy to find me there. And then on LinkedIn, I think I'm the only Brandon Busteed on LinkedIn. At least that was the case as of my recent check. So I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn. Please connect with me there. Follow me there. And then obviously my Forbes authors page will give you any updates on articles that I publish.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Brandon, and good luck with this important work.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for continuing to highlight all the important work that's taking place in the space. And it was a pleasure to be on the podcast with you today. Thanks, and look forward to staying in touch for sure.
Yeah, same here. Thanks so much.
That's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening to Workforces. We hope that you take away nuggets that you can use in your own work. Thank you to our sponsor, Lumina Foundation. We are also grateful to our wonderful producer, Dustin Ramsdell. You can listen to future episodes at workforces.info or on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify. Please subscribe, like, and share the podcast with your colleagues and friends.